JP, thanks for being on the show, man.
My pleasure, Jesse. I think long overdue, but
long overdue.
Making it happen.
Agreed. So, this is the kickoff to the Creative Class podcast. I'm fortunate enough to have known this guy for a good amount of time. I was thinking on how long it's been, and it's kind of scary just how old I am. I can't speak to your youthfulness, but geez, we've known each other for a couple years here.
Yeah, I think, probably coming up on 2 decades.
Yeah, which is crazy.
No joke. Yeah.
No joke. We started, I guess, knowing each other when we were playing football in high school. Mm-hmm. I was a super young Jabron. You were young but older Jabron.
That's right.
Like 2 meters taller than I was at the time.
You had the silver helmet, though. That's kind of the distinct thing that...
So, is that why you're like, hey, that silver helmet guy?
You put yourself on the map, right? Let's
no.
find a way to... Was that team issued or like...
No, that's just the brokenness of... it was team issued, but it's the brokenness of the program.
Right.
And I got given the silver helmet. It was great in practice because the quarterback knew where to throw.
Yeah.
It was terrible in games because the defense... it was super easy to track me going across
things like shining like a disco ball or whatever.
So so we know each other from football initially, and then you left town, you skipped town, you carried on your journey when it came to the football realm, and then you came back to Kamloops, and football again was what brought us back together. Mm-hmm. But we were also always kind of dancing in the creative field of things.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think between there, I remember, was that Stack Radio back then?
It was the Cheese Stack.
The Cheese Stack. But
yeah.
Because I remember we connected about that with a band that I was in at the time in Vancouver. So,
right.
And you would have been back in Kamloops at that point, as I recall, because you also went away.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know exactly when that was, but I started the Cheese Stack, and it was Stack Radio for the mixes, but the Cheese Stack was the blog.
Right.
I was in London when that started.
When that got going.
Yeah, when that blew up.
Right. No, but I do remember. I remember connecting. Maybe that was kind of the thing, the impetus to start being in touch about that realm. I don't remember if we did shows or anything like that. Was that something that you were also doing here?
I was doing. Yeah, I was
like
promoting.
I
was promoting at the Commodore and then Rivers.
And were you up at the place off of...
Yeah, we're at Sports Central.
Right, yeah.
Doing the pool party jams.
Yeah. Again, I was living in Vancouver at the time and I was aware of those things happening. I thought, maybe we connected on I played a show once in the basement of the Max.
Right.
I can't remember if you were involved with that. But anyways, no. So that was my experience at the time, as you were kind of that anchor point of... as you know, right, when you move away, you become disconnected from people here.
Yep.
And then
you come back super energized to do something
totally
for the community.
Yeah, and then I think, and then those sorts of people kind of, when you're seeking that, in my situation, when I was being in Vancouver trying to connect with people here, you ended up being kind of that lightning rod. This is probably going back 10 years ago in itself.
Yep.
So I remember that kind of connected us into that realm.
Right.
And then obviously you've been doing your thing, that was probably the jump off point for a lot of this a decade ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That essentially morphed into the corporate wedding private party situation that we're DJing for.
Yeah.
Not every weekend anymore, but
right.
That was it.
Yeah. And so an interesting journey. It's funny. I was talking with a friend about that kind of 10-year number. When right around that time, I also lived in Victoria, and I had the opportunity to work at a brewery there called Phillips, and that was that for me, that was kind of a watershed moment of seeing that you can have a 9-to-5, you can have a corporate job, but it can be rooted in creativity. And I think for myself at that point, I wasn't really certain what career path I would take or how I could earn a living doing it kind of morally and ethically. And so that was an interesting thing where, they have artists, as all breweries do now, but you've got a graphic designer on staff, you've got a sign painter on staff, you've got a set creator on on staff to do the music events and that sort of thing. But it was a sign painter who was talking about, he was a second generation sign painter. His dad did that.
Cool.
And so he was saying like, he's like, you basically have to commit to it and then do 10 years, and year 11 is basically year 1. So you're going to do it for a decade to learn, and you're going to be garbage. And then it begins on year 11. And so that's just kind of when you mentioned that. And I don't know if you feel that way.
100%. I never thought of it that way, but that is the reality of all this.
Right. And kind of that's probably also in like the mastery hours idea, or like, I think there's just a lot of different ways of framing it, of like, you have to put time in before you really have any, like experience or skill set or something to say about it.
Yeah. And I was, not blackout all the time, but in my early years of party mob, like it was, you wake up with money in your pocket, but you don't always
remember how you got
it. But
yeah,
it was good because there's enough in there that enough people were a part of it. And then you obviously grow out of that. But
yeah, well, I think you have to, otherwise, it's not sustainable. Like and then that's again kind of like using that brewery. It's at some point you need to have a consistent living. And it's great, when you're young and you can kind of fly by the seat of your pants without a plan, and you're kind of like, you're living off the supply at the same time. But I think there's a big price tag attached to that, or it's a finite amount of time that you can get away doing it.
Absolutely.
And so I think that in itself, right, is like the journey that you took, and over that 10 years, and just to refine it and still have the creative side, but do it in a way where like, you're not waking up like the next morning wondering, did I rob a bank, or like, did it go well, or am I going to get a call back, or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, cause it was 24, I think 23, 24 when I, you understand that. Well, I guess I saw an opening in, wow, like you can make money in the creative fields. There is some sort of life that you can live. People will pay for it. You just need to treat it the right way. I was fortunate enough to live at my parents' house until I was 27. I pushed that to the limit, and that wasn't for the sake of partying, but that was for the sake of saving every dollar and learning the crafts and taking the huge L's. But yeah, that 11-year mark really strikes home to me. Like we're in the 9th lab right now, but this is all because of a DJ company, in the heart, which is, when I was at school, you never thought a DJ company could make anything happen. You think that's just either you're doing, either you're partying and having a good time, or you're Calvin Harris. Like the difference between that, there's no, you don't get to see a lot of the people in the middle ground of that. And I think that exists for a lot of the creative fields, but there's a whole bunch of creative people out there making a living and enjoying what they're doing, and or subsidizing their living with the creative realm. Yeah.
And that's a good example. Like, again, I think, you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think we're taught to swing for the fences, and like, you need to swing for the fences, and you need to be all in, and you need to go for something. But like, if you're using like music, whether it's, DJing or performing artists like myself, like, I think for whatever reason, we're ingrained to think of that upper echelon of success, like selling out Madison Square Garden or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that it ignores the process and that tenure, like the journey and all of that. It just assumes you go from point A to point fame.
Yeah.
And which is like, it's an impossible leap. And I think it sets a lot of people up to get discouraged, or to not be all in for the 10 years, when you're not immediately seeing results because you're not Calvin Harris, or you're not selling out arenas. People get discouraged and they give up. And yeah, I think that was, for me, I can't remember where that occurred to me, but that perspective shift of looking at it year by year, or measurable goals, realistic goals. And then you feel incentivized to keep going, because you feel like you're succeeding, and you're, even if you're not making 7 figures, and like, I'm sure that was a situation for you, right? Like, sometimes you're kind of limping along, but you're getting along by virtue of what you're doing. And I think that is a success that should be celebrated more so than like kind of the lofty, unrealistic one. It's just like all those little incremental steps.
Absolutely. And that's become more clear to me every step of the way, is that the disconnect between where we're at and like fame so many things have to go perfect for you to be famous in
Yes.
the creative field. Mm-hmm. But there's so much success still happening in the middle ground.
Yes, and fame doesn't. Fame, we're I think conditioned to equate success and fame.
Yep.
When there are two very different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would argue. I think that's maybe the challenge as well. Like you're saying, is like taking the time to reflect, which can be difficult when you're in it and there's so much that requires your attention. Because I think that reflection and that ability to kind of take stock of where you're at and what you've accomplished, that's kind of the fuel that reinforces the process, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this is great. I don't want to get too far ahead because I would love to jump back so that we can get kind of a perspective as to your journey into the creative realm. And I think you know where I'm going with this. So if you can just dig in and let us know where we came from.
I guess starting in the beginning, I grew up in a house where my dad was a working musician, so he listened to a lot of interesting stuff. So as a kid, that was kind of my upbringing, is listening to, kind of golden age jazz records, just things that were not the mainstream whatsoever, which reflecting back was, I think, very formative for me in my medium as a musician. And I think that speaks a lot to my perspective. An interesting experience. So a lot of my friends now are people who I went to elementary school with. We've stayed really close, and a lot of them have ended up in the creative field. One of my best friends, Brandon Vlustek, he was a graphic designer. He's retired now. He was the creative director for Slack, which is the office interface company. So he did quite well with that. Another good friend, John Flair, he does film in Vancouver. So same kind of concept of what you're doing. But he has a company as well. Both of them had interesting paths where they, and they're just like yours, or I think any entrepreneur that's kind of, had to really go for it. As you start out freelancing and you're working 3 other jobs, so that you can freelance and, build a reputation and that sort of thing. I know in Brandon's case, he was doing show flyers. John was doing music videos with no budget. And in both of their situations, they were able to gain experience and gain skill and move up. And both of them to end up in positions of success. An interesting thing here that I would equate that to, we did a program called Odyssey of the Mind. It might have been Destination Imagination.
Right.
And there's like kid stuff like in grade 5 and grade 6 and grade 7. But it was a really interesting, it's like abstract problem solving essentially. So kind of the one that we would do is you would get some sort of problem. You need to like demonstrate some sort of abstract concept in like a 7-minute play. They would give, then there's another portion where you're doing like these word challenges and that sort of thing. And so that was a neat thing that we were involved with at a young age, that I think was very formative, just I think for fostering that part of our development. And then I think we also went to a pretty unique high school that we both went to. I felt John Peterson, for whatever reason, just had an interesting combination of that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think, for myself, like I kind of embarked on, or I was immersed in that environment just in my home life. And then by extension of my peers, and then by extension of school. And so for myself, started playing in bands in grade 9.
What was your instrument when you were playing there?
In high school, I played bass, and that was just my dad played bass, and he had a bass, and the band needed someone to play bass. So I just kind of got the part by default by having access to the instrument.
Well, it's better than me that just like, let's hand you a trumpet. Let's see how you do. Oh, you can blow. So yeah, let's rock this. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
At least there was something there. Like you had seen it enough to.
I think so. And some things probably I had absorbed by osmosis. Not that we were playing good music by any stretch of the imagination, but I think just for me, that was another huge process, that would eventually influence what I do with Factotum. Mm-hmm. And, but just kind of at that age, it was really this world, the same example with the music I was listening to at home that was different than what you'd hear on the radio. And then also when you become immersed in kind of the underground DIY scene and that sort of thing, it's just such a revelation, when you're 15, 16, 17, that, you don't have to follow that the cookie cutter trajectory that everyone has laid out for you.
Right. What were you listening to? What was your jam back then?
Again, that's interesting. Like if in the 90s, I was into kind of the pop, like obviously like, Nirvana and the Smashing Pumpkins and Green Day.
Now, is this from your parents though? Because you were saying like how you grew up with the music.
Yeah. So I mean, that would have been stuff that I was listening to, with my peers.
What was your parents? What were they jamming to?
My dad was into like Weather Report would be, it's like this 70s fusion jazz group. I remember a lot of that. Steve Winwood, do you remember that, like, I don't know, like, I want to say like 2004 Call on Me, that, that song?
Yeah,
so that's sampling a Steve Winwood song called Valerie.
Shit.
Yeah. So you should look up the original, like it's
cool.
kind of like, it's just A+ pop music in the vein of kind of like John Lennon and Paul McCartney extension.
Is it close to the Call on Me?
Yeah, that's like that Call on Me sampled a line from it. I don't think that was his biggest song though. But I remember we had that one album and he was just kind of like a virtuoso singer and a great musician.
Right.
Anyway, so that was interesting for me whenever that Call on Me song came out. I was like, oh yeah, shit, we listened to that on vinyl at home growing up.
Right.
So yeah, I had kind of those odd eclectic things, and then obviously like was into kind of the normal 90s fare. I was like really big into Tupac and that East Coast, West Coast era rap music.
Right.
Then in high school, I think
you were in the heat of that too, which is cool.
Yeah,
when it was bubbling.
Well, I think I have memories of Cobain's death and Tupac and Biggie Small's death. Like I definitely was plugged in enough to be aware that happened. I don't think I realized the magnitude of it because that was just kind of, normal.
Well, we don't see that as much these days, right? Like a death happens, we're blown away, but it's not to the aggression and the madness that it was at that point.
For sure. And I think you also don't realize it's kind of like, also, 90s culture, like the Bulls. And when you're in it, you don't necessarily realize the importance and impact it will have on the grander scale until like now when we're all watching that Bulls documentary, and you realize, that's like one of, if not the greatest sports teams ever. And so I think you can say things about, Nirvana, obviously huge influence. I would, for me, Tupac was my favorite, but looking for what he did for that era of rap music.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just I was too young to not have the context of what came before it. But then, when you look back on the body of work, you realize how that just like was a 180 for rap music.
Absolutely.
And even how, like, we were talking kind of off air, but how his vocals were treated. Like there was a lot of like game-changing things that have stuck around since then.
Let alone the poetry and the intellectual component that he brought to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so I think, just kind of all that confluence of things. Like I said, I was fortunate to start playing in bands at a young age, start touring at a young age. So I remember in grade 10, we'd play in licensed places in Vancouver. And
really?
Yeah, we played, I remember playing the Cobalt, which I don't think that doesn't exist anymore, but that was down in like the Chinatown, East Hastings area when it was super gnarly. And I mean, that's just kind of a pretty wild experience to go in there as a 16, just like, 16 years old, like terrified.
So how did that come about? Like, who hears you or what happens to get you in that room?
Then, as I recall, it was just, there was a lot more live music happening. I think maybe by virtue of the fact that there was just less things for people to do. So I think people were more apt to go out to shows. Right. It's the same thing around that time in Kamloops. Like I recall there being a show, and generally like an all ages show, every other week. Like there was always music that you could go see.
Right.
There was a lot of tons of different, so unlike like now you'll have a business like the Blue Grotto, and that they're in the business of doing that, and it's, fairly high stakes. At that time, you had a lot more kind of small scale promoters, or like even in high school, one of my bandmates, like he was like the co-owner of like a little warehouse venue in town, just kind of like down Victoria Street.
Crazy.
Yeah. So there was a lot more of those things that existed at that time. And I don't know if we see them as much, but as I recall, there was like a database on the internet where you could just look up promoters and venues. I remember the summer before grade 12, we played like a 14-day tour. And I just like
it's madness, man.
Yeah, and I booked this tour in the course of, like making some pizza pops at home, like just got on the phone, called these people, and they're like, oh yeah, great, okay. So it happened a lot more.
Right.
Whereas now you're right. Like I think you have to have a calling card and be established and know people. It's something that you have to build up to a lot more.
So you're touring, you're jamming out. Because in my at least in my radar, and I'm not a huge live music guy, but in my radar, there's a blip there where I don't see you for a while. Then you're coming back to the hometown.
Yeah. To fill that blip in quickly, went away to school, was playing football at UBC, which was a great experience. I still was playing music at that time, but was fairly focused on that. And then to get back to where we were talking with Cheese Stack, I think that was 2009, I want to say, that maybe reconnected.
Yeah,
somewhere around there.
Yeah, Cheese Stack started 2006 is my first year in university, but it started bubbling and getting hits 2 years later. So that
about that timeline. Yeah. So once I'd finished school,
spot on.
Once I'd finished school, actually at that time I was working at a music club in Vancouver called the Media Club. And so that kind of really reignited going and seeing shows every night.
So what were you doing there?
I was a door guy, a bit of a door goon.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think
jacked up UBC football player. Hey, rocking the door.
It was a great job. There was only 2 altercations I can remember dealing with. Like people were generally coming there looking to have a good time and enjoy the music. So they didn't need like a big imposing person, which, I'm none of those things. Just being around that and the energy and, it was just kind of going back to, being a teenager and just that like visceral like all the great things that attract people to live music, just seeing that night after night, and that really ignited that fire to get back into it. So I think it was about 2009 in Vancouver at that time, started a band, and then it's just kind of been going ever since.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I guess going ever since, because then you come back, Factotum blossoms.
Right.
So tell the people that don't know about Factotum, what's the mindset behind that? Because as I mentioned, I want to bridge the gap between the creative realm, because everyone can be creative, and it's easy to do. It's easy to be creative, but how do you make not just like a job of it, or how do you bring money in, but how do you make music or the creative world work for you? How do you make that happen?
Right.
How do you open doors with that?
Right. So the context was coming back to Kamloops and expecting it to be like when I left at 18 or 19, which was, as I was saying, shows every week, this, incredibly diverse music scene that just felt incredibly vital, and that didn't exist whatsoever.
Right.
And at that time, it seemed very much predicated by, bands who would play, mostly covers. And I remember that kind of being the conversation with any promoter is like, well, do you play covers? And then that's never been my thing. And so there was just no opportunity. Right. So Factotum was kind of born out of kind of self-advocating, I guess, at the start. So it was a means to, my thought was, if the gatekeepers won't let us in here, and then I have this memory of how it was and how I think it could be, to become the gatekeeper and use Factotum initially as just kind of like a platform to unite like-minded people. And so it's kind of just like you were saying, I think it's 4 or 5 years now for me. So, I still have some time before I hit my 10 years, but it's evolved, I think, out of necessity and as I learn. Currently I would view it as sort of a 360 approach to being an artist. So, first and foremost, I play music, and that's a huge priority in my life. So Factotum served as a role as a publishing company for myself, and then also was able to work as a publishing company for other artists initially in town, but now across the province. Even worked with a band in Winnipeg. But as you find out, that's not necessarily enough. In a market like Kamloops, it's not enough to get you by. So started looking at doing show promotion, which then, so that became an opportunity to become the gatekeeper and allow for the kinds of bands that I want to see to have an opportunity to play, to start bringing in interesting bands who are on tour, to have them stop here, to start to build that culture and get people engaged there. And then again, so with that, I think that was successful, but on its own was not enough. And then in the, I'll use the Blue Grotto as an example, able to have a very good mutually beneficial relationship there where, they were very open to letting me do shows, which is different from their usual programming. But, as the culture built, people were interested. There's a pretty cool scene. And so that helps their business out. That gives me a place to work. From there, I was looking at, I don't have the means of my own production. I don't have my own physical space, and I can't do shows there regularly. What are some other options? And so that got me further down the rabbit hole of looking at larger scale events. So kind of Brew Loops, Luminosity are two that kind of jump to mind where in a community like Kamloops, it is very much, it's a small town and you get to know people. And that was an opportunity to do something that, again, in my mind was mutually beneficial, to provide some guidance for, which bands they should be working with, really modernize it as far as my tastes go and the kinds of bands that I think should be playing here and that would be, relevant and, and hip and all that sort of thing. And that was kind of it was the next piece of the pie. So I guess that's kind of ultimately what I'm trying to say is I think in a marketplace like Kamloops as a creative, and I'm sure this has kind of been your experience, I don't think you can be just a thing just by virtue of our size. I think you need to look at it from a lot of different angles. But in doing so, I think that's when you can build like an even greater community than just people coming to a show. Because once you start working with other organizers, you're able to tap into their niche, their aesthetic, people who support them. I kind of the last project, which met kind of an ill fate due to COVID, but was the Brodigan Library.
Yes.
Which was myself, Mitch Forgy of Redbeard and Bright Eye, and Greg Clone of GK Sound.
I was jazzed about that.
Yeah, it was. It was really frustrating. I mean, completely circumstances beyond our control. But to turn a negative for Mitch with the closure of Mustache and Go, which was an interesting idea for him to streamline Redbeard, turn that negative into a positive, and we were only able to do a handful of events before things kind of got locked down, and it doesn't look like we'll be able to continue. But so that was, getting back to just learning sequentially. That to me was kind of, that next level up of just of putting on shows at other people's places, and it maybe without any long-term vision. All of a sudden, by doing that and then doing festivals and meeting people and I think just as the ball started rolling and you started gaining momentum, to have a physical space was kind of that next iteration. Yeah.
And opportunities came from doing those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's getting back to my original point, I think, as well, of with each level and each kind of piece of the pie getting bigger, all of a sudden it starts to look more viable and more sustainable. And that's kind of, I think, the thing that was very frustrating with kind of when we looked at the numbers of that, it was like, yes, this can be a place that can last and can be here for a while and can be that it's like, finally the physical manifestation of something that I've been doing, just like by patchwork and, kind of putting things where I can.
Can you speak on, I guess, maybe the thought process behind, taking those next steps? Like, was there a moment where you're like, okay, well, I need to take this next step, or was that kind of built into the process? Were you just like riding a wave, or like, where did that come from?
I think for me, and this would be different for everyone, I think it was just built into the process, and they were just kind of logical steps that would come along the way.
Right.
For myself, like I work a day job as a high school teacher. So I have that security net for better or for worse. So I've been in a situation where I've been able to do art in a largely financially sustainable way. You could definitely make the argument of if I didn't have that safety net, would I have progressed further? There's certainly some validity to that, but there's also perhaps the possibility in my individual circumstance, maybe resources would have run out and I would have given up. It's really hard to say, but I think, for me, it's been a matter of, in terms of my process, of just continuing on, and things become apparent as you do good work. And I think for me, it would start with having, with my previous band at Mission Dolores, for that to become largely financially sustainable on its own. So that being kind of its first piece where we're not making money off of this, but if we put out a release, if we tour, it pays for itself, it pays for our food. We're coming out even. So then you look at, well, what's the next piece for that? Merchandise was one that, that has worked for me.
Well, I know I've never seen so many units move. And like when it comes to your partnerships, I think that's been so great. Every time I'm wearing a shirt right now. The Factotum label with a partner, I'm always thinking to myself like, damn, like what am I doing right now? Like I'm just a little chump over here, not, spreading that brand awareness and making those connections. Not that I immediately think I'm a chump, but it was so great to see you utilize these avenues to spread your word, to get that out there and give some validity to what you're doing as well,
Yeah. Well, again, that I think for my process has been working with other people and bringing success to other people. And I find generally that reciprocates with yourself.
Right.
I'm a firm believer as well, like empowering people around you who are good at what they do. So for myself, for instance, I'm not a graphic designer, but Frank Luca, right, who has done a ton of posters, photography.
He's a local champ, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to shows,
for sure, yeah. And those are
his branding, for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely, and those are his strong suits. And he's a creative trying to earn a living off of doing that. Yeah. So by if I can create a situation for him, where it empowers him, where he's able to get paid from this project, or even Under Wraps in town. I have a great relationship with them. They're a local, they do all they did those they've gone out of their way and above and beyond to do interesting things. Like they did that double color pull, of the.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if that's a shirt.
No, that's the shirt I got right now.
Yeah,
I'll show the people that are on. Sorry, those of you tuning in on video or audio right now.
But so that was a situation of them going above and beyond to take they're working with a design. That's kind of where it ends for me.
Yeah.
But because, we have a good relationship and I'm trying to bring them work as much as possible, they put a creative spin on it. And so I think for me, it's kind of worked out. I think that is how going along in this process, opportunities arise for me anyways, when you're working, it's as a band, right? Like you want the venue to feel really good about booking you and having a show there. Yeah. Like you don't want them leaving with a sour taste. And that probably goes back to my, my media club days in Vancouver. Like when you would see the divas, who are like, they're not at a level where they can behave like that yet, but that's like, that's a great way to kind of shoot your career in the foot. So that's kind of always been my mindset is work with people, empower those people. I guess maybe that's, for me, checking my ego to reach out to other people who have a good skill set.
And to that, like you've chosen the best partner as possible, right?
I think yeah.
And even at just like a fundamental nice people level.
Yeah.
Like you have Greg, like all the people that you're saying right now, Under Wraps, they all supported me in Summer League.
For sure, yeah.
And that to support a festival with no backing, no marketing ability, and say we're going to support you 100%.
Exactly.
That to me is like, I couldn't have felt better about the community element of it, where people are saying, let's buy in, let's spend money, because the huge amounts of money were spent even on the Summer League front to help support something that had no history, no ability to prove itself. They weren't waiting for me to already have a product. They said, we're going to help support it because we want the community as a whole to benefit from this. So
for sure. And yeah, I'm sure there's been situations where they've gone out of their way or they've met me halfway. I mean, you would be a good example even when we did Metal Lodge, if you remember that, the pop-up shop.
Yeah.
Because I think that was probably fairly early on.
Yeah,
early on in Factotum. So really by that, I mean, if there's no reason, I don't even know how I pitched that idea to you, just probably over some beers.
Well, yeah, as a pop-up, you're like, I want to run this pop-up. It's middle of winter.
Yeah.
All I could think was like dirty floors. It's going to take me like 2 hours to clean, but why not, right?
Yeah, but you put up, you put up your space so that we could make it happen. And as I recall, that was an awesome event. And that
Absolutely.
And that really I think encapsulated kind of just my vision. Like I mean, that's probably going back was that 2017 maybe? Somewhere around there.
A couple years ago at least.
Yeah. But I just remember, I mean, that was like very much the vibe that I've tried to go for Factotum events. Like you're getting kind of a broad scope of people. Like it's not just like a hyper concentrated scene.
You've done a great job at bringing in different elements, different ideas.
Right.
And different, feel like different businesses that don't necessarily, like they're not a natural thing to bring into the environment, but they suit the environment quite well.
Yeah.
Because that was, I mean, Iron Road had just popped up, I think.
Yep.
For that one. So we had...
That's right, yeah. The Jazz guys came.
Yeah,
and I think that was maybe their first gig that they played together. Yeah, and
absolutely.
then that's become a big institution for Iron Road.
100%.
Yeah, I guess, and I mean that speaks to probably, you know, for myself having cut my teeth at Philips in Victoria, and then, you know, having 3 years at Red Collar, and I approached those jobs with the exact same mentality of, you know, this like needs to be like, everyone's in it together. Let's do cool things. Like at Red Collar, I co-opted a lot of ideas from Philips, but we did.
Of course. Every idea you brought from Philips, like it was really cool to hear a brand like that pushing the limit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that was like, it was just kind of like adult fantasy camp but that was really the ethos of the business is like, yeah, it's like something improbable like that. Why don't we put on a show in our loading bay?
Right.
Okay, let's do it. And I think also that mentality of, for me, that was very formative in, it's like, if you have an idea, do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing stopping you. And it's kind of like you're saying with Summer League, right? Like, you have a concept, it's not even proven out, whatever, do it.
Let's go.
Yeah. And it will happen if you apply yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think getting back to that idea of working with businesses, and it just gets back, you know, it's helping others and they will help you.
And so it can be a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
As long as everyone's giving it.
Yeah, 100%.
Instead of just reminiscing full time here as to what's going on. You know, one of the goals that I have with life, but also this podcast, I'd love to dive into the idea of making being a creative a possibility. And whether that be full-time possibility, part-time possibility, side hustle, I think there's so many incredible people in Kamloops in terms of the skill. Like it's not a small town when it comes to the ability, but it might be a smaller town when it comes to the business side, which I think separates a lot of markets and the ability to get into Kelowna as an artist or a DJ. If you were looking at a young gun that loves playing some sort of instrument at a young age, knowing what you know now, what do you say? What kind of direction do you give, or do you even give direction?
No, it's funny you mentioned that. I had a Zoom call with someone who I'd never met, who had never seen, but kind of like a friend of a friend situation, and it was exactly that. And I always try and give the caveat, like, this is my approach and how it works for me. And like, I do work a job, and that's my paradigm, and I'm very happy with it. I think a few things, I'll use like music as a lens, but I think it does like that mastery hours, 10 years thing. I think that's a big starting point to consider, and kind of self-advocacy. So, which again, kind of was Factotum. So a lot of them, kind of a common thing with music as a lens would be, well, I have some ideas, I have some demos. I'm going to send those off to some labels and see what the response is, and generally what I'm going to tell them is like, I don't think there'll be any response, like the way a label work, like they're investing money into your product, like an album, with the assumption that they're going to be able to sell a lot of it, but they're not going to make that investment until they have a personal relationship with you. And it's like, that's kind of what we were talking at the beginning, it's like, that's almost in the same vein of like, I have some demos, I'm going to play MSG, or, I'm going to play the Coliseum.
Yeah.
So generally my advice to them is to start is to set some incremental goals. And I think this is universal. You would just change whatever the medium is for any creative. But I think, you need to work on getting your mastery hours up. So if you're a musician, you need to start by playing open mics, and you need to work on your demos, and you need to kind of just jump at any opportunity to play when you can. When you feel as if you have something that, will really impact people, and you're excited to showcase that, at that point, you still need to be, you need to be self-advocating, and you're probably going to have to do, something like I did, where you create something for yourself, and it's like the whatever field of dream, like if you build it, they will come kind of idea.
Yeah, we're sitting in my field of dreams
for sure. Yeah,
now.
and so, and that's probably the same thing for your story, right? Is like I don't think any creative can expect to get like. No one's going to really pull you up. I think you need to start to build it considerably yourself and be willing to put that hard work in, whatever your medium is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can get into that trap, like with music, that there's a label that will sign me. I'm like, well, that's probably,
and that shoots you up to where you want to be.
Right, or pays for your record, and it's like, well, no, that's probably 10 years down the line once you've toured and you've booked shows for other bands and you've put out albums on your own and you've shown that you can do all those things. And that's probably analogous to your situation, right? Like starting in your parents' place.
Yeah, as you're saying this, it's funny how when you're in a creative field that you think it's different than a normal business or a normal line of work where you don't have to put in the work. You don't have to prove it before people start buying into whatever you're putting out there, right?
Yeah, it's like starting at a job and working your way up. The only difference is there's no pre-existing structure. You need to imagine that.
Create it.
Yeah, you need to imagine that structure yourself. I would, like oftentimes, I'm fielding these questions from people who are in university who are kind of in that bubble.
Right.
And that's kind of my other thing too, is like, you need to stick with it. You need to stick with it past your university safety bubble. And that's, I think, probably the make or break, or where a lot of people need to decide how serious they are about it and whether they're willing to keep going. But yeah, it is, I think, like you need to build your infrastructure. You need to help others around you because they will help you in turn to build that infrastructure. And, once it's built, then sure, yeah, maybe you can, like, for myself, being able to work with Brew Loops, who had a lot of that in their infrastructure in place, but I was able to take that next leap and book those festivals and do a really good job of my part, but having tons and tons of support from other people doing a lot of heavy lifting around. I think that's what it takes. And I think that's that building is the crucial step that a lot of people, and it's hard ass work as you know, right? Like, and getting back to the Bulls documentary, like for me, there's so like seeing Jordan's process and kind of an interesting thing that I took away that really transcended basketball is like he was hyper focused and he was obsessed and he demanded the most of himself. He demanded the most of his teammates.
Yeah.
And to me, like obviously he's the greatest basketball player of all time, but I feel like those traits, like a lot of people like you and I embody them to some degree where we're hyper focused on what we do. And there's so many people like that. And to me, that was just such like a confirming moment of, it's like, he was in the right time in the right place. And obviously like gifted kind of at that next level, but all those, like that never ending belief in yourself and determination.
That fucking work ethic, man. Obsessive work ethic.
Yes.
Learning from mistakes, being okay with mistakes, but just immediately taking them and treating them as a learning experience and growing from that.
And I think using those setbacks as motivation rather than like a crippling like roadblock that you
100%.
Can't overcome.
And all the work ethic that goes into it needs to be the same as any other industry or any other, you see success, what does it take? It takes that grind mentality, but you also need to be understanding that not everyone's going to be down with what you're putting out there, right? And for the sake of you, when I like the stuff that you do isn't what I gravitate towards, but I will be at every show that you curate because of the culture, because of the people that are surrounding it. And once I'm in it, like because I love music, I love everything about it, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden my ears change and I'm just into it.
Well, and that's, I was just reading this today, actually. It was Dan Mangan talking about the show is really about that experience with other people, and the music is just kind of the facilitator of that. And he was kind of speaking to the ego of performers oftentimes, like it's my show and I drive, I'm driving the ship here, steering the ship here.
Right.
And I think your example like is a great, like one reinforces what he was saying, but two, that kind of speaks to my vision of you go to a show and it's maybe not your kind of music, but you have a good time based on who is there, and the music's just kind of facilitating the night. And the art, like, I get to go up on stage and feel good about myself for my own reasons, but at the end of the day, I think, and that's really been my takeaway and kind of what has made me keep doing it. I think up to 51 shows or something like that when is my last checked. But yeah, it's just like, it's a really good time, and 99 times out of 100, the bands are great, but maybe half the people, they're not into that, but they enjoy themselves, and there's that sense of community, and that's totally huge.
100%. When it comes to the wins and the fails, I quickly understood that I don't need that feedback, that the positive feedback loop.
Yes.
As much as I don't need the negative feedback loop, in a way that everyone seems to know what you should do. Everyone seems to know what the next step is, even though they're following a completely different path and they've never walked your shoes. At what point throughout your career did you make that decision, because I know it exists, to stop listening to those people, or did that feedback loop not exist for you? I would assume it did exist at the early stages, but maybe that was super early considering how early you started playing.
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I think certainly it's interesting. Like, I feel I'm undeterred by negative feedback or anything like that, but also block out a lot of the like, it's just kind of,
you have to go both ways though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think you just kind of, right? Like and I think you can glean stuff and move forward.
You have to be self-aware enough to understand, yes, that was a failure. Yes, you should have approached it differently, or that you need to look back at yourself. But I do think the moment you start taking all the praise, you open yourself up to all the negative, and that just sets you back. Like, there's no reason to feel like a hero full time, right?
Yeah. I think, interestingly enough, having that break, like playing football was big, and in terms of getting really down on myself from and not understanding, I think, the way coaches were pushing and trying to drive me. When I look back at playing at UBC, like, it was, I did well, and I was in like the top 40 of the roster, like, but not in the top 20. Had a lot of positions, I think, to kind of get there, and just kind of never really took advantage of it. So I remember that being a moment of like, a lot of these opportunities came up and I didn't make the most of them, but that's like, at the end of the day, it's like, it wasn't debilitating that my football career didn't get to the next level as I thought, but more so is like, okay, that was great. Like, I was in those positions and I kind of dropped the ball in some instances, and that's great, because I'm going to make sure that never happens again. So I remember having that maybe just more for like a determination piece, but I think that was a changing point where once my career ended, I was definitely just like undeterred, unflappable, and just like any opportunity that comes my way, like, I will seize it. I will not be intimidated by it. I will not be like, I'll not get bogged down by criticism or even.
You won't think about who thinks what about this.
Yeah. Or I think I'm also like, if people are trying to drive me, perhaps, by offering feedback or whatever, like, I'll be a lot more open and receptive to it.
Right.
So that stands out as a moment. I think in terms of music, whether it's what I'm making or shows, I think that's fluid. Like, I think there's always things that I'm improving upon, and I'm always making mistakes, and I'm always learning from them. I think it would certainly be probably in the last 4 to 5. So I guess kind of Factotum is maybe that embodiment of like kind of a definitive point where I was like, I'm just going to do things and I believe in them, and I know, like, in terms of my goals and my vision, they're accurate and they're in the right ballpark, and there's going to be some errors, but I'm in the right direction. I think that might have been that moment where I was like, I'm onto something and I believe in it. And I can kind of block out like, all the pats on the back and all the haters, and I'll use 3 fingers to really intellectually distance myself from that term, but you know what I mean? Like, I think, that's probably the moment where it's just like, okay, I'm on a path, I'm going to do it. But as I said, and that's probably something for people to take away, is it's always fluid and you're always learning.
Yeah.
But I just think when you have that belief, then you know how to correct it and you know how to finesse it and go from there.
So what's hard turn here? What's next? What does the future look like?
We're both kind of in the same boat of uncertain, what does the next year look like? I mean, it's kind of anyone's guess right now.
You're recording?
Yeah, so I guess like I thought I'm using this time for myself. Finally, I think in a lot of the bands I've been in, I've approached it with the idea of like as a collective, although generally I'm, the kind of the creative lead on it, approaching it now where just to do it under my name and as a brand or, just as myself. And I think having a lot, I think finally embracing that kind of that Jordan thing rather than being disappointed by people maybe not rising to my level, accepting that, delegating things a bit better. So I'm using this time, working on, what will be, a 10-song album, something to that effect.
Cool.
And then have that all ready for when hopefully in sometime in the foreseeable future we get back to music. So I mean that's the personal angle in terms of.
So what does that timeline look like?
Well, I'm hoping to have the album out by November, December.
Cool.
But again, it's anyone's guess whether or not I'll be able to do any sort of tour support for that. I think
is that the idea? Like coming from your perspective, like release an album, have a tour set up to follow?
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah, I think so.
For those young cats out there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so like some maybe knowledge to glean for people in music is I don't think you can, it's kind of just like, sending a demo to a label is like, that's a needle in the haystack.
Right.
And just as putting stuff on streaming with no tangible plan of connecting with people, there's so much. I mean, music has been democratized in a great way where everyone has access or far more access to create music and good music. But it's how do you get ears on it? And just putting something on Spotify or Bandcamp is not enough. You need to find a way to engage with people. And then that gets back to the whole building community. It's helping bands out by putting on shows for them in your town so that then they'll reciprocate and do something for you down the road. So yeah, I think, I mean, for me as an artist, that's the plan, to put out an album, to play it in other cities and to do vinyl again. For Factotum, I think, I'm looking at a lot of people are creating music right now. And so just kind of having, trying to keep my ears open and talk to friends and see what they're working on and
cool.
Hopefully be able to put out a few releases. But yeah, it's really hard. It's hard to say beyond that. The Brodigan Library concept, depending on, kind of commercial real estate, that might change dramatically. And so it might
have some options moving forward.
Right.
Hopefully I'm not one of them.
Yeah, no doubt. So I think that idea is still, simmering away somewhere.
Right.
And again, I think it just gets back to what I was saying of, I'll just continue my process, which is working on things and trying my best to do good things.
Yeah.
And
create.
And create. And generally that will create opportunities. And then to move forward there. But yeah, like, a lot of breaks have been put on, and a lot of the things that I, with this year with Brew Loops and it being a Luminosity year, very excited for those, but it's kind of anyone's guess at this point in time whether or not they will happen. So yeah.
I feel that hurt, man. Yeah. So I guess in the immediate future though, we got a little jammer of little something you just put together in this very space. For those of you that are tuning in, this is the first episode. There's a reason why we're so spaced, and visually this isn't the sexiest thing you've ever seen. Although you have two very sexy gentlemen in the space. We did have two other sexy gentlemen, or one of us included, in this. And I don't know, do you want to even speak on that, or because this is going to come out right before?
Yeah, no. Well, I'm dressed a bit nicer in the other one, so I forgot that we'd be filming this. So I kind of
come on, man. Avenue Media's, we got it's multidiscipline here. But.
That's right. Yeah, it's in the name, and I botched that one.
You still look great though.
Thank you. I appreciate
it's on
that.
brand.
It's
I still think
derelict or whatever it is. Yeah, so I mean, I took a lot of inspiration from KEXP, public radio in Seattle, and for anyone who's familiar, they'll do their in-studio performances, but they'll also have like a well put together video that will come out after the fact, with an interview with the host. And for me, that's probably one of, if not my main source for new music or for seeing artists I love, because you get a great live representation. The sound is on point. It looks fantastic with that interview in there. And I think it hits on, what we're doing now. Like you get kind of the condensed podcast. And I mean, obviously I'm huge on consuming information that way.
Yeah.
So it was great. And just seeing kind of your vision, pre-COVID, you were still doing the renovations here, but to come in and see what this space looks like and be able to do something like that, and with a bit more kind of more free-form podcast than interview, just because I think that's an interesting angle to take, is just to have a conversation like we're doing now.
100%.
Yeah. So I think that's, well, one, it was super fun for me at the end of the day. So that's, I guess, all that really matters.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think again, like trying to engage with people in a way, like thinking of that concert thing, right? Of just being a vehicle. Like, yes, I'm playing some songs and I hope people dig them. But even within that, Frank and I were talking about, growing up in Kamloops and some of our takes and, kind of in the same vein of like what has inspired us creatively. And so that's kind of, it's just, I appreciate having the platform here to do it because the facility is great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for two, I don't know, maybe that's something that we can see more of, just because I think it's an interesting way of experiencing, the music is there, but there's also that human interaction.
100%. I mean, even the clip you sent me, getting to know an artist and seeing the intricacies and how they move and how they act. Like, I just, you don't often get that,
Mm-hmm.
if it's an interview format, you're bound to like boring ass questions. And
right.
You don't actually get to explore the mind at all, right? It's
That's
like
right.
You have a predetermined goal. Obviously, tonight's podcast had no predetermined goal.
We got there though.
We got some things in there, but you actually get to know someone.
That's
in some shape or form, right?
Yeah, but then I think the other side is with, for me as a fan of music, like with production value, and that's where I think, like there's obviously a lot of Instagram Live and Facebook Live.
Yeah.
Which I don't interact with as much because generally kind of, for me as a musician, I want to hear the music and sometimes I feel it's not represented adequately.
It's trash.
Yeah.
Sure. We're going to change that here at Avenue Media House, I'll tell you.
Yeah. So
we got some plans on the Instagram sucks though. Like natively they want to push the mobile,
right?
But musically that doesn't. That's not
how
jam.
People. Yeah,
that doesn't
people
help
should
you
be
at all, right?
How they should be experiencing music, and particularly if the person on the other end is going through their phone or even just like a shitty mic into an interface is not enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think having more of a proper studio setup, and really I think that's kind of the closest thing that we're going to get to for a while.
Some time.
But yeah, it has the added bonus though of I think genuine conversation.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah. Get to know someone. Good sounding music. You sound great, by the way.
Thank you.
We haven't done the post. We haven't dug into it at all. But my first take.
It was all right then.
You sound pretty good.
Okay.
I'm gonna lie.
We can work with that.
I look forward to hearing what comes out the other end.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's my approach for this has been to make everything just as a standalone. Like I can sit here and just play it on guitar.
Yeah.
But then on the record, I think to have to totally, have a produced kind of grandiose vision.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the fun part for me as a creative. But then I think also being able to pivot in you can perform it stripped down or you can perform it with
absolutely
3 other people, 5 other people, 7 other people, whatever. That's kind of the thing that turns my crank currently. Yeah. And yeah, I think we'll see how it turns out.
I think it's going to be super jazzy.
Mm-hmm.
What did we shoot for? What's the date on that release? You say the 27th?
Yeah, Wednesday.
Is
that the 27th?
Is that this one? No, today's Wednesday.
A week today.
Yeah. Beautiful. No time. JP, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Jesse.
having you on here. And when it comes to the release that we did, there's some tunes from the album. I know that you had already previously released at least one of them. that I was aware of.
Yes, I have a single out on Spotify from a different recording session though. But yeah, I think that's kind of indicative of the direction that I'm going. Just kind of orchestral pop music, and same sort of thing. Like it's there's like some clarinet and baritone sax and like a bunch of different
Cool.
instruments in there that obviously I'm not going to do live by myself. But yeah, that's out there.
Cool. So where can people find you?
Instagram, it's at lancaster.jp. And the other one, Factotum. Use them in equal amount, but I think Factotum's also just a great example, like beyond myself as an artist, just to be aware of, either shows or events when that happens, and then music that I'm finding interesting. Yeah.
Cool.
And then just some great photography here and there, and all, Frank Luca, or I think you've got some stuff in there as well from the album. Actually, we should have talked about you being on the album cover, but we'll save that for another day, I guess.
Let's dig into that come summertime.
Absolutely.
Cool. For those of you that want to check out the recording and the beautiful set and casual chat, how would you describe that, JP? Like what is that?
I think it was just banter is what I would say. Like I felt I was interviewing Frank at one point. I think
you might have been.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing I wanted was just Frank Frank's my friend, and that was the first time I'd seen him or you or any human in like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I was just kind of happy to hang out and just like talk about things, which I think we hit on.
You definitely hit on that.
Yeah.
Cool. So to check out the banter and the live music, that sounded really great in the 9th Lab, downtown Kamloops on Victoria Street. Tune in soon, the 27th. Unless, something more crazy happens than a pandemic, that shit should be out. So stay tuned. Thanks, JP.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm working on a Wednesday, then up again the next day. So-and-so is popping, man, I skip him like he leg day. Kick it like I'm Pele, I never care what they say. Put myself on Spotify, so every day my payday.